Hey, welcome back to another video. This video is going to be on building an infinite scroll Livewire data table setup. It's not really going to be a data table, it's just going to be a regular HTML table, because if I were to try to build everything, this video would be way too long. The difference between this video and the other data table videos is that in this one I'm going to try to really start from scratch. So I'm going to install Tailwind, Livewire, and kind of configure the whole project from start to finish. To give you an idea of what I'm trying to build, because I'm kind of winging it. I've built this before, but I don't have a copy or any record of what I've built. So here's kind of what I want to achieve, maybe not as polished, but every time you scroll, more records, or in this case colors, are queried and show up. So this is actually not that difficult to get working within Livewire. I actually tried to get this to work with some event firing weird stuff in JavaScript, and a coworker of mine actually pointed out that I should use observers. That's definitely the best way to go, so I'm going to show you how to do that. And I hope you enjoy this video. If you do like it, please do consider subscribing. It really helps out. I think this channel is growing much quicker than I expected, so I'm glad to see everyone here, and I hope that you enjoy this video. Also, one more thing I'd like to mention is that the timestamps will probably be below in the comments somewhere. So if you want to skip ahead through this video, because it's going to be quite long, then you can go ahead and use that. Okay, so let's get started. First thing I want to do is open up my console here, my iTerm, and I'm going to create a new Laravel project. First, I'm going to cd into where I want to actually create it. And I'm going to use the command Laravel new, and then project name, in my case is Livewire infinite scroll. I'd like to quickly mention that on a vanilla Laravel project, there's no auth scaffolding, so we're going to have to create a couple files here and there on our own. And the Tailwind setup we're going to get from the Tailwind instructions on the website. They've actually posted a new page for Laravel specifically for version 2.0, which is really, really cool, because there's some issues with post CSS 8. So that really clears up the confusion there. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Let me just cd into the project here. All right, so the first thing I want to do is open it up in my editor. Look at the env, the environment file, and make sure that everything makes sense. So in the case of this project, I've already created a database called Livewire Infinite Scroll. The only difference is that these are underscores and they need to be just regular dashes or hyphens. The rest of it should be fine. So Laravel by default actually comes with a users table migration, and we're going to use that because it's just the easiest way to get data that we can test the table with. So I'm just going to run php artisan migrate. And if we go back to our database or our SQL Pro, we can see that we have a users table and the migrations table, password resets, and failed jobs. Now that we have this, we can actually see the database. So first thing we want to do is go back to our editor, open the database seeder, and just uncomment this line. Now 10 records is not enough. That's what by default is being set here. And I'm going to set this to 500 users, right? And that'll give us enough to kind of scroll through forever. Actually, let's make it 100 so that we can see the bottom of it when it comes time to test the scroll. Now I can run php artisan dbseed. Go back into our SQL Pro. You can see we have 100 records, which is exactly what we need. And that's pretty much it from the database side, which is amazing, but it's really that simple. So the next thing we're going to do is actually install Tailwind. Like I mentioned before, Tailwind actually has its own Laravel specific page now because Laravel has Mix. It makes it really easy to install, but Mix is not compatible with post CSS 8 yet. And so there's some specific installation instructions for version 2 and higher here, and we're going to follow these. So the first thing I need to do is run npm install, apparently. So we can do that, and this might take a little while. Okay, so that's now finished. We can move on to the next step, which will probably be this npm command here to install everything we need. Okay, and that's installed. We can look into our package.json here and see what happened. So we have Tailwind CSS, and it's the post CSS 7 version, which is exactly what we need. And now we can continue on to this command, npx tailwind init, which is going to create the tailwind.config.js file in the root of our project. And that's basically where you use some you can extend styles and create styles and add plugins, add configuration for Tailwind Purge. In this case, we're just going to generate it and leave it for now. So it looks like it's generated. We could actually check tailwind.config.js, and there it is. So perfect. And let's move on to the next. So Configure Tailwind to remove unused styles in production. Well, if it's already here, we might as well use it, right? So what this is going to do is it's going to look in the resources and then any directory within resources and any file that's .blade.php, .js, or .vue, and it's going to look for those the classes within those files and not eliminate them in the production CSS file. So I'm just going to copy this, even though we're not going to have any view files, and just put that in here. Save that. And we can move on to the next step. So we need to actually require Tailwind CSS within the webpack.mix file. So the way this is done is just copying this require line and going into your webpack.mix file and just putting that there, which is really, really easy. And then you'll need to copy and paste this into your app.css, which is the root CSS file that's going to be, I guess, compiled. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but it's in the resources CSS app.css directory, and that's good. And then the last thing we need is actually to add these tags here to the top of the main page, the app.blade.php, if you're going to follow Laravel convention, which we'll do afterwards because that file currently does not actually exist within our project. So for now, I believe that if we run npm run watch, it should actually build. And if it builds correctly, that means that everything's installed and we can continue on to actually installing Livewire. And it looks like it compiled successfully, so we could actually move on. I'm just gonna stop that, clear the command line, and we can move on to installing Livewire. So Livewire is installed with a composer command, because it's a PHP package and not a JavaScript one like Tailwind. And the basics is you install it and then you include this in whatever your root template file is. Again, if you're following Laravel standards or like conventions, it's app.blade.php, which again doesn't exist. So we're gonna get that figured out in a second. Let's just install this first. And Livewire actually supports PHP 8 now, which is great. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to run it because I'm actually on PHP 8 right now. So I'm very excited to see what the future holds for a lot of these packages. It's the Laravel ecosystem has been growing very quickly, and it's been really exciting to watch it. And I'm just really excited to see where things go. In any case, we can now create our app.blade.php. So let's go back to our editor, go into the resources directory, views, and we're just going to create a directory called layouts and call it app.blade.php. And within here, we can start creating our root template, like our base template for all pages. And in our case, it's just going to be one page. So it's not really anything too crazy. But the reason I wanted to create an app.blade.php, this is a file, this is something I actually mentioned in a previous video, is because Livewire by default will actually expect a resources /views /layouts /app.blade.php file when it's trying to render out its components. And doing it this way actually allows us to skip creating an entire controller for this. We can just create a route and direct it directly into our component, and it'll kind of like figure itself out, which is really cool. So I'm gonna fast forward through the boring bits of this and then maybe pause and explain if I find something interesting to talk about. Okay, we can include our Tailwind stuff right below that title tag. Something to note is that this is not perfect HTML. You're going to want to create some like dynamic titling of the pages or something. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I feel like this will be enough. So what this is going to do is it's going to set all the meta stuff we need and that Tailwind recommends. And it's also going to pull in that app.css that we added our Tailwind styles to. This right here is actually built into Laravel. I believe there's a mix helper that's built into Laravel mix. But this will work. It's going to pull in that app.css that's compiled within the not the resources, but the public directory, which is right here. So we have an app.css right here, and it's going to pull that in, and we're going to have Tailwind. So that's one thing. The other thing to note is that when we're getting Livewire, we need to include an @Livewire styles right here. And that's best done at the bottom of the head tag or the head section. And this is going to pull in the styles needed for Livewire that are included with the package. We also need to include @Livewire scripts, and that's done at the bottom of the body section. So we can do that there. And now I'll continue on building the rest. There's only a little bit left and we could move on. Okay, so I just want to explain what's happening here. I've created a container here, and it's going to be centered horizontally with MX Auto. And container, all that does within Tailwind, if you're not aware of how Tailwind works, is it's going to limit the width of the container to a predetermined size. And within here, I just created an H1 tag with text 3XL, text center, and a margin top and bottom of 10. And that's going to space out the title a little bit. And within here, down here, I actually created another container and also centered horizontally. So X is actually left and right, whereas Y, like here, is top and bottom. And that just contains the slot. So what the slot is just basically where the Livewire component will be slotted into this template. Also, it's worth mentioning that this template should be dynamically titled. So this should be passed in from the child component that's being slotted in. And this should be replaced, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to skip that. Okay, now here comes the fun part. We're going to actually create the Livewire component that we're going to use to show the users table, or that will become the users table that will actually be slotted into this template. So the way we do this is by just running a artisan command, php artisan make Livewire, let's call it users table. And as you can see, this generates a users table.class and a users-table.blade.php template file. And so now in our project, if we go in and look up users table, we can see we have the class. Let me just show you what the template looks like. It's empty and nothing will come up. So for the purpose of just this part of the tutorial, I'm going to create first the route, and then I'm going to create what I need to within the component class, and then we can get working on the template. So to create a route, we go into the web.php file, and we're going to default this route to show the users table. So how this is done in Laravel 8 is now it's within, if you have a controller and then a specific method, it's done within an array. But since we're just directing it straight to a component class, we can just input the class here. So it's going to be users table, make sure that's imported, and class. And what this does, calling just class on the end, it will actually just return the string. And that should be enough. If we go and now use valet link to link this so we can actually see the project within my browser, and then valet secure, we can see that that's finished up. So if I copy this now, go into the browser and look at that, there's our app.blade.php header there, and our component will be somewhere here. And as you can see, it's centered, everything seems to be working, and we can move on to the actual component class. What we need to do here is create all the public properties we'll need, create a couple methods or actions as they're called within Livewire, and make sure that we're querying for the users correctly so that the table comes up with the correct data. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create those public properties I need. Within Livewire, if you create a public property, you just create, it's like a variable. We'll call this one total records, and we won't assign anything to it. And we'll create another one called public load amount, and we'll default this to 10. So for those of you who are not familiar with Livewire, these will both be available within the template file that this is going to render, which is this one right here. So livewire.users-table. They will also be available within this component, obviously, and we're going to set total records within a mounted method. But I just want to make sure everyone understands total records is total number of user records within the database. And this one's going to be the number of records to load per scroll event, I guess we can call. And so this is the number that's going to be loaded by default and then loaded again once we scroll and again once we scroll. So the first load is going to be 10 records, then 20, then 30, then 40, and so on. Total number of user records within the database is going to basically just hold the count of total number of users that we have stored. And you'll see later on why we'll need this within the template. And now we need to actually set the total records, and we can do this using a public function. And actually I've got a handy shortcut for this. We'll call this mount. And within here, we just call or set this total records equal to user, which we need to import, and count. Once this component mounts, it's going to query the total number of user records within the database, and it's going to store this within here, which will be available within our template. And we also need another method called, we can call it load more, I guess. What this method is going to do is actually increment this count right here so that we know how many to load with the query that we're going to put right in here in the render method. This is going to make a lot more sense in a second. So I'm going to call this load more, which makes sense in the context of when we scroll, we want to load more. So it's just going to increment that value. And we're going to write this load amount plus equals 10. So it's going to be whatever it is plus 10. And so the first time this is going to be called, it's actually going to turn this into 20. That makes sense. And in here, we're going to include users data, and the key is going to be users. So call it users, and we're going to make a query for all users, limit this load amount get. And so this is going to get this many records and put that into our template, which we'll be able to hopefully see. For example, let's see if we could just output the first user. So users first name. If I go and load this up in the browser now, we should see just one name, and we do. So that's complete, and we can now move on to actually creating the template file, which, like I said, is going to be probably the most complicated part because it not only deals with Tailwind, but also observers. Just to start off, we're going to define class here, and I'm going to fast forward over any of the boring parts so it doesn't take too long. Keep in mind that I'm just I don't know how this is going to look, so it might look very ugly, but I think for the purpose of demonstrating how it works, it'll be just fine. So, so far I've just created a table auto, full width within the container, and I see I've misspelled container. And this is going to be centered. I actually don't even know if we need this, to be honest, but we'll see when we load the page. Each table head row is going to be have a padding left right of 4, padding top bottom of 2. So it's going to look like a rectangle. And now I'm going to continue on to the T body. And my goal for this first iteration is just to get all the user records showing without any of the fancy stuff. So just bear with me. Okay. And so now technically if we reload, we should be able to see a table, and I hope it's not too ugly. Oh, it's actually not that bad at all. So this will actually work fine, and we're going to work with this. I don't think I need to make any changes. I'm actually quite pleased with how it turned out. So the next thing I want to do is actually make sure I can add an ID to the last item in the for loop to show that it is the last item, because I will need to track when this hits a certain point of the page, right? As of right now, this table row has nothing on it, but we can change this because Blade templates, or what's being used in here actually, allows you to check if the current loop is the last one. And so the easiest way to do this is there's a loop variable, and if you check if it's the last one, you can then do something. So in this case, I'm just going to add an ID of last record, and we can end if I reload the page now, we can see that the last record has the last record ID, which is exactly what we need. So now we can track whether that's on the screen or not, and know that we need to scroll more. So we can continue on. This is pretty much it for the Livewire specific stuff. What I do want to add though is a little section here, and now you'll see why those public properties will be very useful. I want to add a section that shows that we're out of records to render, right? And so the way we can do this is by comparing the load amount, which is what we're incrementing. If that's greater or equal to the total records, we want to display a message. So the way we do this is by using a p tag, giving it a class. Class is text, gray, 800, font, bold, text, 2XL, text, center, my10, so margin top bottom of 10, just to give it some space. Oh, it should be margin. And within here, we can just write no remaining records. Cool. So now that we have that, we should see that it's not actually on the page. Right? If I flip this though, just temporarily, you can see that it looks like this. Oops, it should be centered. So, and that's exactly what it should look like. So that's great. We can now flip this back and continue on. So one more thing I wanted to include is that I wanted there to be a loading state when the records are being loaded. Livewire includes something really, really handy just out of the box, and it's called wire loading.delay.class. So when Livewire is going to be loading something, querying in some sort of query state, I guess, we can set the table to be with an opacity of 50% or any class we want, really. And that'll show that it's actually loading. The trouble is I will only be able to show you this once I have the observer set up for querying. And I will have to slow down the actual requests within the network tab because local development is relatively fast, so there's no way to see actual delays. But in any case, we can now move on to the observer part. So the first thing I want to do is, just before this closing div tag, I want to create a script block. And within this script block, I'll be writing some JavaScript just to basically trigger the event that will load more. And so I want to define a constant called last record. And we could just use like old school JavaScript document.getElement by ID. I believe that this is a decent way to go about doing this. Const options, we need to define options for our observer, which I'll explain in a second. Let me just scroll up. And we need to define a root. We don't actually need to, but I will just for the purpose of this. A threshold. So set this to 1. And we need a root margin. And we could set this to 0 pixels. And now we can actually define our observer. So const observer equals new intersection observer. And within here we create a callback. So entries, we pass entries and the observer. And create our function. And within our actual function, we just type entries dot for each and loop over them. Entry, so for every entry, we need to check. So if this entry, and of course entries, what entries are going to be is the last record. And there should only ever be one last record on the page because we're only checking within the loop here. If it's the last one, add this ID, right? And so it's going to loop over these entries and there should only ever be one. And it's going to check if this entry is intersecting. And what that means is it considers is intersecting if this element is on the page based on these options. And again, I'll explain these options in a moment. I just want to make sure that I have this working correctly, and then I'll jump in and explain what each of these means. So entry.is intersecting. And within here, if is intersecting, we could call a Livewire action or method. So at this is something that Livewire provides, load more. And so like I said before, this will make sense once I finish this up. This dot load more will trigger this action within here, load more. So I hope that makes more sense now. And the last piece of the puzzle here is we need to actually call it. So observer.observe, and we pass in last record. So I know this is really difficult maybe to understand, so let's run through it from the top. First, we get our last record using document.getElement by ID. This is the last record. There will only be one of these on the page, and because we're only adding this ID to the last record within the loop right here, and there can only be one last one, right? Then we define our options, and our options are root. So the element that is used as the viewport for checking visibility of the target must be the ancestor of the target, defaults to browser viewport if not specified or if null. So in our case, because it's null, it's going to be the whole viewport, which means that if the last element comes into our viewport, this observer will be triggered. The threshold is either a single number or an array of numbers which indicate at what percentage of the target's visibility the observer's callback should be executed, right? So in our case, a threshold of 1.0 or 1 means that when 100% of the target is visible within the element specified by the root option, the callback will be invoked. So when 100% of this is shown within our viewport, the last element, this load more will be triggered, right? Because it will check and it will technically be intersecting. And the root margin is margin around the root and can have values similar to the CSS margin property. And you can define top, right, bottom, left. The values can be percentages. This set of values serves to grow or shrink each side of the root element's bounding box before computing intersections. Defaults to all zeros, which means that we can basically just define a margin around the edges where we want there to be some sort of limit. So like if we defined 100 pixels on the bottom, this wouldn't be considered is intersecting until it's 100 pixels above the bottom of our viewport. From what I understand, that's how it works. So in any case, we've set it to basically 0 root margin, threshold of 1, which means that the last record has to be 100% visible on the viewport, and root of null, which means that our viewport is basically what we consider as intersecting. And so now if we reload the page, we should see that it's working. It's working perfectly actually, which is really exciting. The one thing you'll notice is that the initial load only has 10 records, and when you refresh and it notices that the last record, number 10, is on the page, usually it'll just instantly create that second query. It'll automatically increment another 10 just to get 20 on the page. If we change this to 20, the initial one to 20, and reload, you can see that there's 20 right away. So it only queries more once I scroll down. And you can see that none of that opacity stuff is showing up. You can see that we're loading more. And the fun thing is, if you look in the network tab, so once I scroll down, you can see requests being made here, which is really cool. So every time I scroll and before we get to the bottom and no remaining records are found, it's actually making requests, which is awesome. So within here, once I reload the page, we have 20 records. I haven't queried anything else because I haven't scrolled yet. I can opt to use slow 3G. And when I scroll, you can see that the opacity goes to 50% before the load is completed, which is pretty cool. Now you can use this to trigger like a spinner, a loading icon, something like that, or maybe just do something more drastic because this isn't immediately obvious what's happening. But it is a pretty cool feature that Livewire has built, just right out of the box. You can just define wire loading.delay.class. And I thought it was really cool. In any case, this tutorial is now complete. If you do enjoy this content, please, like I said, do consider subscribing. There's also a link to Cloudways below. If you need somewhere to deploy Laravel apps easily for you or your clients, please do consider using that link below. That really does help. I actually have a video on my channel of me deploying a Laravel app to Cloudways. It's very, very easy. So if you are interested in that, I recommend checking that out. And once again, thank you, and I hope to see you in the next one.